the woman who broke Nazi codes, then history tried to erase her. She broke the most sophisticated encryption device the world had ever seen, armed only with pen, paper, and a mind that could see patterns invisible to machines. Yet when the victory was won, another American took credit, classified her work for 50 years, and left her name to die in silence. The woman who saved thousands of lives by decrypting Nazi Enigma codes spent her final years believing she was merely a footnote to history. Before we go deeper into how this decision changed the course of World War II forever, make sure to subscribe for more history that actually happened. The story begins not in wartime, but in silence. August 26, 1892. A girl is born in Huntington, Indiana, into a Quaker family that values education but expects obedience from daughters. Her father, John Marion Smith, names her Elizabeth, deliberately misspelled with an E in the middle instead of the traditional A, a small act of individualism that would prove prophetic. The family adheres strictly to Quaker principles: simplicity, pacifism, silent worship, and clearly defined gender roles. When Elizabeth announces at age 20 that she wants to attend college, her father refuses to fund such impractical ambition. A woman's place, he believes firmly, is in the domestic sphere, not in lecture halls pursuing abstract knowledge. His daughter will marry, raise children, maintain a household. This is the natural order. This is proper. Elizabeth Smith has other ideas. She takes work as a substitute teacher in rural Indiana schools, saving every dollar from her meager salary. She lives frugally, endures her father's disapproval, and in 1915 arrives at Hillsdale College in Michigan with enough money for tuition. She studies English literature with intensity, devouring Shakespeare, Milton, Chaucer, Tennyson. She has no aptitude for mathematics, shows no interest in engineering or science, and has never heard the word cryptography. She imagines herself teaching poetry, perhaps writing literary criticism, living a quiet, scholarly life. The future she envisions involves dusty libraries, earnest students, the careful annotation of Renaissance texts. She does not imagine codes. She does not imagine war. She certainly does not imagine that she will become one of the most effective intelligence operatives in American history. June 1916. 23 years old, freshly graduated, Elizabeth travels to Chicago seeking employment. She visits the Newberry Library, hoping to secure a position as a research assistant among the rare books and manuscripts. A librarian learning of her interest in Shakespeare mentions that an eccentric, wealthy businessman named George Fabian is looking for someone with expertise in Elizabethan literature. The job description is vague, possibly temporary, but the compensation is generous for the time. Elizabeth expresses interest. Within hours, literally within hours, a chauffeur-driven limousine pulls up to the library. A telegram has been sent. Colonel George Fabian, though he holds no military rank and never served in uniform, demands to be addressed by this title. He is a textile magnate, heir to a fortune, and a man possessed by obsessions both brilliant and absurd. He has built a private research complex called Riverbank Laboratories on 350 acres along the Fox River in Geneva, Illinois. Here, funded entirely by his personal wealth, scientists conduct experiments in acoustics, genetics, cryptography, and Fabian's consuming passion, proving through hidden codes that Francis Bacon, not William Shakespeare, wrote the plays attributed to the Bard of Avon. Elizabeth is swept into the limousine, driven 40 miles to Riverbank, and hired on the spot. Her job is not to break codes, but to find them. To search the Shakespeare First Folio, line by line, letter by letter, searching for secret messages allegedly embedded by Bacon to claim authorship. She is given a magnifying glass, seated at a desk stacked with leather-bound volumes, and told to discover patterns. She is told that Bacon used bilateral ciphers, steganographic techniques, acrostic signatures. She is told that careful analysis will reveal truth hidden for 3 centuries. What she finds instead, methodically and scientifically, is nothing. The supposed codes are pattern-matching delusions, the product of imagination imposing order on randomness. But the process of searching for these non-existent codes teaches her something profound: how to see patterns, how to recognize structure in text, how to distinguish signal from noise. She is learning cryptanalysis by attempting its opposite: code construction and recognition.
She does not realize it yet, but she is being trained for a war that has not yet reached American shores. At Riverbank, she meets William Frederick Friedman, a 24-year-old geneticist hired to work on agricultural experiments in plant hybridization. William was born in Russia, raised in Pittsburgh, educated at Cornell in genetics and plant breeding. He is Jewish, intellectual, bookish, awkward around the flamboyant Fabian. He has been conscripted to photograph Mrs. Gallup's Shakespeare research, documenting the cipher hunt with plates and chemicals, work he finds tedious and scientifically meaningless. He and Elizabeth begin working together, initially cataloging Bacon's works, later studying the theory of hidden writing. They discover shared skepticism. The Bacon-Shakespeare codes are nonsense. But the methods they develop to analyze them, frequency counts, pattern tables, structural analysis, are scientifically sound. Together, without formal training, they begin teaching themselves cryptanalysis from first principles. They read everything available: historical treatises on codes, military manuals, mathematical papers on probability. They learn that language has statistical structure. English uses the letter E most frequently, followed by T, A, O, I, N. Common digraphs include TH, HE, IN, ER. Trigraphs, though, and, ing. These patterns are linguistic fingerprints. Simple substitution ciphers, where each letter is replaced by another, preserve these patterns. If you see a ciphertext letter appearing 13% of the time, it probably represents E. Pairs and triplets can be identified similarly. This is frequency analysis, known since the 9th century but still foundational. But sophisticated codes hide these patterns. They use polyalphabetic substitution, where each letter is enciphered differently depending on its position. They use codebooks, replacing entire words or phrases with numbers or arbitrary symbols. They use nulls, meaningless characters inserted to disrupt frequency analysis. They use transposition, scrambling letter order rather than replacing letters. Each technique requires different analytical methods. Elizabeth and William teach themselves all of them. They solve historical ciphers for practice. They create their own codes and break each other's work. They are inventing modern American cryptanalysis in a library on a millionaire's estate, driven by intellectual curiosity rather than any practical purpose. Then history intervenes. April 1917. The United States declares war on Germany. The American military, despite having soldiers, ships, and artillery, has virtually no signals intelligence capability. Army and Navy officers intercept German communications but cannot read them. The War Department realizes belatedly that European powers have been employing professional cryptanalysts for years, breaking enemy codes, reading diplomatic traffic, using signals intelligence to shape strategy. America has no such capacity. Desperate, military intelligence officers search for anyone with cryptographic expertise. They discover George Fabian's private laboratory. Fabian, sensing opportunity for prestige and influence, offers Riverbank's facilities and staff to the government. Elizabeth and William begin breaking German diplomatic and military codes for the U.S. Army. They train military personnel in cryptanalysis, develop intercept procedures, traffic analysis techniques, code-breaking methodologies that will form the intellectual foundation of American signals intelligence for decades. The work is intense, classified, isolating, and it is the beginning of careers that will span both world wars. In May 1917, in a small ceremony at Riverbank, Elizabeth Smith and William Friedman marry. It is a partnership forged in shared intellectual work, mutual respect, and the peculiar intimacy of people who spend their days inside each other's minds, solving puzzles no one else understands. They will remain married until William's death in 1969, raising 2 children, building parallel careers in intelligence. But the paths of their careers will diverge drastically. William will become famous, celebrated, decorated. Elizabeth will become invisible. Not because her work is less important, but because the systems that record achievement were not built to see women. When World War I ends in November 1918, Elizabeth believes her cryptanalytic career is over. William is recruited by the Army Signal Corps to continue developing American military cryptography. He will eventually become chief cryptanalyst for the Army, credited with breaking the Japanese Purple Cipher, one of the most important intelligence achievements of World War II. But Elizabeth is not offered a similar position. The military does not hire married women for classified work. Social conventions dictate that wives stay home, especially wives with children. Barbara is born in 1923, John in 1926. Elizabeth settles into domesticity, raising children, supporting her husband's career, writing occasional scholarly articles. The files from her wartime service are packed away. The skills she developed seem destined to remain unused. For 7 years, silence. Then, in 1925, a different war reaches her doorstep. The 18th Amendment has turned the United States into a battleground between law enforcement and organized crime. Prohibition makes alcohol illegal, and illegality makes alcohol extraordinarily profitable. Criminal syndicates operate fleets of ships smuggling Canadian whiskey, Caribbean rum, and European wine into American ports. These rum runners are not unsophisticated. They use radio communications to coordinate operations, broadcasting coded messages directing ships to rendezvous points, alerting smugglers to Coast Guard patrol locations, arranging payoffs and deliveries. The Coast Guard intercepts hundreds of these radio transmissions. Every message is encrypted. Not a single one can be read. Treasury Department enforcement agents, known as T-men, raid ships, seize cargo, arrest boat crews. But the organizational leadership stays free because no prosecutor can prove the chain of command without the radio messages as evidence. The encrypted communications exist, recorded on paper, stored in files, but they might as well be written in an alien language. Then someone in the Coast Guard Intelligence Division remembers that a woman in Washington once broke German codes during the war. Perhaps she can help with this problem. They send a courier to Elizabeth Friedman's home with a package of intercepted rum runner messages. She sits at her kitchen table, spreading the papers out, studying the jumbled letters. To an untrained eye, the messages are meaningless chaos. XMFGJQWLPS ZMGHKLPSQ. To Elizabeth, they are puzzles with solutions. The first step in cryptanalysis is identifying the system. Is this substitution or transposition? Monoalphabetic or polyalphabetic? Is a codebook being used? Are there nulls? She begins with frequency counts, tallying how often each letter appears. If it were simple substitution, the patterns would match English letter frequencies. They do not. Either the cipher is more sophisticated or it uses a codebook. She searches for repeating sequences. If the same plaintext phrase is enciphered identically each time, the repeated ciphertext will reveal structure. She finds repetitions. 3 letter groups appear multiple times across different messages. This suggests a codebook. The rum runners are using a commercial codebook, probably one designed for business communications, with words and phrases assigned 3-letter codes. But the codes do not appear in the standard commercial codebook she knows. They must be using modifications, numerical offsets, alphabet shifts, or custom substitutions applied on top of the base code. She tests hypotheses. If the codebook groups are shifted by a fixed number, she can recover the shift by identifying one known plaintext ciphertext pair. She looks for messages that might contain predictable text. Radio call signs, ship names, dates, locations, these are likely to appear. She guesses that a common 3-letter group might represent the, or and, or a ship name. She applies possible shifts, checking if the results produce other valid code groups. After days of work, testing variations, she finds the pattern. The smugglers are using a commercial codebook with a numerical offset applied to each group, plus null groups inserted at irregular intervals to frustrate frequency analysis. Once she knows the system, decrypting the entire batch of messages takes hours. The plaintext reveals the complete structure of a rum-running operation: ship names, sailing schedules, drop-off coordinates, payment amounts, names of corrupt officials. The Coast Guard arrests the entire organization. Convictions follow, and the Coast Guard asks Elizabeth to continue her work. What begins as a one-time consultation becomes a career. By 1927, Elizabeth is a full-time Coast Guard employee, paid a modest civil service salary, working out of a cramped office in the Treasury Building. She trains assistants, teaching them frequency analysis, codebook reconstruction, cribs, and pattern recognition. By 1931, she is running the Coast Guard's cryptanalytic section, the only woman in the United States heading a signals intelligence unit. Her team is small, herself and 3 or 4 assistants, working with pencils, graph paper, and manually operated cipher machines. The volume of work is staggering. Between 1927 and 1933, they decrypt over 12,000 Rumrenner messages, breaking codes in 50 different cipher systems. Some are simple substitutions, some use sophisticated polyalphabetic schemes. Some employ mechanical enciphering devices. Elizabeth solves them all. Her work does not end with decryption. She testifies in federal court, translating encrypted messages for judges and juries, explaining cryptographic techniques to people with no technical background. Defense attorneys attack her credentials. She has no degree in mathematics, no formal training in cryptography. How can the court trust her analysis? Elizabeth responds calmly, precisely. Cryptanalysis, she explains, is not mathematics, but linguistics and logic. It is the science of pattern recognition, of understanding how languages work, of applying methodical reasoning to incomplete information. She demonstrates her methods in open court, showing step by step how she derived plain text from ciphertext. Juries are convinced, judges accept her translations as evidence. Between 1927 and 1933, her testimony helps convict dozens of smugglers, organized crime figures, and corrupt officials. She becomes known in underworld circles as the woman who reads invisible ink, the cryptanalyst who can break any code. Her reputation is built on success. She has never testified about a decryption that proved incorrect. Never. One case becomes legendary in law enforcement circles. In 1933, the Treasury Department investigates Consolidated Exporters Corporation, a vast smuggling syndicate moving alcohol from Canada through the Great Lakes and down the Mississippi to Gulf Coast ports. The organization is sophisticated, disciplined, militaristic. They use a complex code system, changing keys regularly, employing multiple cipher methods, inserting nulls in decoys. Coast Guard intercepts fill file cabinets, thousands of messages, none readable. Elizabeth spends months on the case, reconstructing the cipher systems layer by layer. She identifies that they are using multiple codebooks simultaneously, switching between them on a predetermined schedule. She recovers key tables, identifies null patterns, reconstructs the underlying plaintext. The decrypted messages map the entire criminal organization: leadership structure, financial flows, bribed officials, international connections. The trial in New Orleans, United States versus Consolidated Exporters.
In March 1943, the U.S. Coast Guard prosecutes the entire Rogers Liquor Store Corporation, bringing 35 defendants to justice in one massive prosecution. Elizabeth sits in the witness stand for 2 full days, translating messages, explaining techniques, demonstrating beyond reasonable doubt that the codes say what she claims they say. All 35 are convicted. It is the largest prohibition-related conviction in American history, and it is Elizabeth Friedman's cryptalysis that made it possible. But this public success conceals a classified reality. Since the late 1920s, Elizabeth has been working not just on domestic criminal cases, but on foreign intelligence intercepts. Her Coast Guard unit decrypts communications from Chinese opium trafficking networks operating on the West Coast. They break codes used by Japanese intelligence agents monitoring U.S. naval movements in the Pacific. And, increasingly, after Adolf Hitler's rise to power in 1933, they intercept and decrypt Nazi communications probing the Western Hemisphere. These intercepts are not made public. They do not appear in court testimony. They are classified, analyzed, and sent to military intelligence and the State Department. Elizabeth is working in 2 separate worlds: the public world of criminal prosecutions and the secret world of signals intelligence. She cannot speak about the second world. It is classified. It will remain classified for over 60 years, long after her death. December 7, 1941.
The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor transforms American intelligence overnight. The military mobilizes every resource. The Coast Guard's cryptanalysis unit, which has been operating quietly in the Treasury Department, is absorbed into the Navy's Signals Intelligence Command. Elizabeth's office is moved, her unit's designation changed, her work redirected toward Axis signals. But she is not promoted. The Navy does not permit civilians to command intelligence units, and in 1941, women are not allowed to serve in the military in intelligence roles. A young male lieutenant, less experienced and less skilled, is appointed to lead what had been Elizabeth's unit. She is given the title of cryptanalyst, assigned a desk, provided access to intercepts, and told to continue working. She does. The demotion stings. The loss of authority is humiliating, but the work matters more than pride, and the work she does over the next 4 years will help save thousands of lives and dismantle the Nazi intelligence apparatus in South America. Since early 1940, Elizabeth has been tracking Nazi communications across Latin America. German military intelligence, the Abwehr, has established networks of agents from Mexico to Argentina, operating undercover in embassies, businesses, import-export firms, and private residences. These agents gather intelligence on Allied shipping, military installations, political developments, industrial production. They transmit their reports via clandestine radio, using high-frequency transmitters hidden in attics, basements, and rural estates. The transmissions are brief, encrypted, transmitted at irregular times to avoid radio direction finding. But the Coast Guard, and later the Navy, intercepts them. The files accumulate, hundreds, then thousands of encrypted messages. Elizabeth's job is to break them. The early Nazi codes are relatively simple: hand ciphers, substitution systems, modified commercial codes similar to what rum runners used. Elizabeth breaks them methodically, exploiting operator errors, identifying repeated phrases, recovering keys. The decrypted messages reveal disturbing patterns. Nazi agents are tracking every major convoy leaving American ports. They know ship names, cargo types, sailing dates, destinations. They are feeding this intelligence to U-Boat Command in Berlin, which uses it to position submarine wolf packs along convoy routes. Allied shipping losses in 1941 and early 1942 are catastrophic. German submarines sink over 1 million tons of Allied shipping in the first 6 months of 1942 alone. Freighters carrying food, munitions, fuel, tanks, aircraft, medical supplies, all destined for Britain, North Africa, or the Soviet Union, are sent to the bottom of the Atlantic. Without these supplies, the Allies cannot sustain their war effort. The Battle of the Atlantic is as critical as any land campaign, and it is being lost. Elizabeth's decrypts reveal how the enemy knows where to strike. Nazi agents in Buenos Aires, Rio de Janeiro, Santiago, Mexico City are watching ports, noting departures, transmitting intelligence. One message, decrypted by Elizabeth's team in March 1942, reads, "Queen Mary departed on March 8, 1800 local time." Another, sent 2 days later, "The Queen Mary on the 12th at 1500 MEZ was reported near the coast at Ceará, in the direction of Belém through Piratini. The RMS Queen Mary, converted to a troopship, is carrying 8,398 American soldiers from New York to Scotland."
If this intelligence reaches U-Boat Command and submarines are vectored to intercept, the ship will be sunk. 8,000 men will drown. The ship has speed. She can outrun submarines, but only if she is not ambushed. Elizabeth's decrypt reaches Navy Operational Command within hours. Orders are transmitted. The Queen Mary alters course, taking a longer southern route away from known U-boat concentrations. The ship reaches Brurach, Scotland, safely on March 13. 8,000 men disembark, alive, unaware how close they came to death. Elizabeth never knows their names. She never receives thanks. She is not permitted to know whether her intelligence was acted upon or ignored. This is the nature of signals intelligence. Cryptanalysts work in isolation, decrypting messages that disappear into classification, acted upon by distant commanders. Feedback is minimal.
Success is measured in disasters that do not happen, casualties that are never counted because they never occur. But in March 1942, disaster strikes from an unexpected direction. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover learns that Coast Guard cryptanalysts have identified Nazi agents operating in South America. Hoover sees an opportunity. If FBI agents arrest these spies, the Bureau will receive credit for smashing a Nazi espionage ring, generating headlines and enhancing Hoover's reputation. He does not understand signals intelligence. He does not grasp that arresting agents will reveal that their communications are being read, causing remaining networks to change codes and go silent. He understands only publicity. He orders FBI agents in South America to conduct raids. On March 17, 1942, FBI agents working with Brazilian police raid locations in Rio de Janeiro, arresting several suspected Nazi agents and seizing radio equipment. Press releases are issued. Newspapers report FBI success. Hoover holds press conferences. And every Nazi intelligence officer in South America realizes their codes have been broken. Radio traffic ceases. Frequencies go silent. Operators disappear. Networks shut down. Change procedures. Upgrade encryption systems. 2 years of patient signals intelligence work, building profiles, identifying agents, mapping networks, are destroyed in a week. Elizabeth's intercepts become gibberish. She is back to zero, facing new codes, new systems, new protocols, designed specifically to resist the cryptanalysis that broke the old ones. The intelligence officers who worked the case are furious. The Navy protests to the FBI. Hoover issues a bland statement defending the raids as operationally necessary. The damage is irreversible. Elizabeth does what she has always done. She goes back to work. By April 1942, new clandestine radio stations begin transmitting across South America. The signals are encrypted with systems far more complex than before. The Nazis have deployed Enigma machines, sophisticated electromechanical encryption devices that produce ciphertext previously considered unbreakable. The German military has used Enigma since the 1920s, developing progressively more complex versions. By 1942, Enigma represents the cutting edge of cryptographic technology. The device resembles a typewriter with rotors. An operator types a plaintext letter. Electrical current passes through a plugboard, then through 3 or more rotors wired in complex substitution patterns, then reflects back through the rotors in reverse, producing a ciphertext letter that illuminates on a lampboard. Each key press advances the rightmost rotor 1 position, changing the electrical path, altering the substitution. After the first rotor completes a full rotation, it advances the middle rotor 1 step, which after its rotation advances the third rotor. This creates a polyalphabetic substitution system with a vast key space. A 3-rotor Enigma with a plugboard has over 150 trillion possible settings. Without knowing the rotor order, rotor positions, ring settings, and plugboard connections, brute force decryption is effectively impossible. In Britain, mathematician Alan Turing and the cryptanalyst team at Bletchley Park are breaking German military Enigma using electromechanical bombs machines.
Machines called bombes. These devices, each the size of a large wardrobe, automate the testing of possible rotor settings, exploiting structural weaknesses in Enigma encipherment to reduce the search space. Building one bombe costs tens of thousands of pounds. Bletchley Park operates dozens of them, working around the clock, staffed by hundreds of personnel. Even with this industrial-scale effort, breaking Enigma is difficult, time-consuming, and sometimes impossible if insufficient ciphertext is available or if keys change before enough messages are intercepted. Elizabeth Friedman is breaking Enigma messages in a Navy office in Washington with 4 assistants, pencils, graph paper, and no mechanical aids. The Enigma models used by Nazi agents in South America are not identical to military versions. They are commercial Enigma machines, slightly simpler, with fewer rotors and less complex plug boards. But they are functionally similar: polyalphabetic substitution, rotating wheels, vast key spaces. Breaking them requires understanding the machine's internal logic, recovering rotor wirings, and identifying daily key settings. This is not a task that can be done casually. It requires months of patient work, thousands of intercepts, and insights born of experience. Elizabeth begins with fundamentals. Enigma, for all its sophistication, has structural weaknesses. The machine's reciprocal wiring means that if letter A encrypts to X, then X encrypts to A under the same settings. This symmetry creates statistical anomalies. The reflecting rotor ensures that no letter ever encrypts to itself. If plain text is E, ciphertext cannot be E. This seems like a minor detail, but it is exploitable. If an analyst can guess part of the plain text, a crib, and test whether the guessed text could produce the observed ciphertext, the self-encryption restriction eliminates impossible positions. Elizabeth collects messages, hundreds of them, looking for patterns despite the encryption. Radio operators make mistakes, they reuse keys, they send stereotyped messages, weather reports, routine status updates, standard greetings. These phrases provide cribs that crack the encryption. Elizabeth also exploits transmission metadata. Messages sent at the same time each day likely use similar content. Messages of identical length might be duplicate transmissions. Call signs, though encrypted, often follow patterns. Over weeks and months, her team builds statistical profiles of each Nazi transmitter, when they broadcast, how long their messages are, what preambles they use. These patterns provide context that helps narrow the cryptanalytic search space. By late 1942, after months of relentless work, Elizabeth and her team have broken the Nazi Enigma systems used in South America. They can read the messages again. The Germans do not know. They believe Enigma remains secure, and this belief is their vulnerability. The decrypted messages reveal more than shipping intelligence. They expose the structure and ambitions of Nazi intelligence in the Western Hemisphere. The spymaster coordinating operations is Johannes Siegfried Becker, codenamed Sargo, German for sarcophagus, a fitting name for a man whose mission is to bury Allied hopes in the Americas. Becker is an SS Sturmbannführer, equivalent to a major operating under business cover in Buenos Aires. He's 41 years old, German-born, fluent in Spanish, experienced in clandestine operations. His network includes over 50 agents spread across Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Bolivia. Some are German nationals, others local recruits sympathetic to fascism. Their agents are embedded in key positions: port authorities, communications companies, police forces, military staffs. They report not only tactical intelligence, ship movements, cargo manifests, but strategic information, political developments, labor unrest, even behaviors of key persons.
Anti-fascist movements, government stability. Becker's mission extends beyond intelligence collection to political warfare. He funds pro-Nazi newspapers, finances fascist political parties, organizes propaganda campaigns. He cultivates relationships with sympathetic military officers preparing for potential coups. His ultimate goal is to shift South America's political alignment toward the Axis, creating a region friendly to German interests, potentially providing bases for U-boat operations or even military occupation. If South America falls into the Axis sphere, the strategic balance of the war shifts dramatically. The United States would face hostile forces on its southern flank. Allied access to South American resources, oil, rubber, minerals, food, would be compromised. The entire hemisphere would become a battleground. Elizabeth reads every message Becker sends. She knows his network, his agents, his plans. But she cannot act directly. Her role is to decrypt and analyze. Action is the responsibility of operational agencies, Navy intelligence, the State Department, the FBI. Her decrypts are compiled into intelligence reports, classified secret, distributed to officials who make policy decisions. Slowly, carefully, pressure is applied. The State Department protests to South American governments about espionage activities. Evidence, carefully sanitized to avoid revealing that codes have been broken, is provided. Governments arrest agents, shut down clandestine radio stations, expel German embassy personnel involved in intelligence work. The dismantling is gradual, deliberate, designed to avoid revealing the source. By late 1943, Becker's network is collapsing. Agents are arrested, turned, or forced to flee. Communications are disrupted. The intelligence flow to Berlin slows to a trickle. By mid-1944, the Nazi intelligence presence in South America is effectively destroyed. Elizabeth Friedman's cryptanalysis made this possible. Without her breaks, the networks would have remained invisible. Without her team's decrypts, Allied commanders would have remained blind to Axis activities in the hemisphere. By the end of World War II, Elizabeth's Coast Guard cryptanalysis unit, now absorbed into the Navy, has decrypted over 4,000 Nazi messages. They have broken 3 different Enigma systems used by German intelligence in South America. They have provided actionable intelligence that led to the identification and neutralization of dozens of Abwehr agents. They have revealed Nazi plans for political subversion across Latin America. They have contributed to the security of Allied shipping, preventing uncounted attacks. And Elizabeth has done all of this while being systematically erased from the official record. August 1945. The war ends. Elizabeth resigns from government service. She is 49 years old. She has spent nearly 30 years working in intelligence, much of it classified. Before leaving, she signs the mandatory secrecy oath required by all personnel with access to signals intelligence. I solemnly swear never to reveal, without proper authority, any information concerning cryptanalytic work conducted during World War II. The oath is legally binding. Violation carries criminal penalties. Elizabeth understands what this means. She can never publish her memoirs. She cannot describe her work in public. She cannot correct the record when others take credit for what she did. She can never tell her children the truth about what she accomplished. The secrecy will last until the documents are declassified. And in 1945, no one knows when or if that will ever happen. She returns to private life. She gardens. She writes articles on unclassified topics, historical ciphers, Shakespeare's use of language. She supports William's career, which continues to flourish. He is promoted, decorated, celebrated as one of the NSA's most important figures.
Greatest cryptanalysis in American history. She is his wife, a supporting figure, remembered, if at all, as the woman who broke rum runner codes during Prohibition. The classified work, the Enigma breaks, the Nazi networks, the intelligence that shaped the war remains invisible. But J. Edgar Hoover has not finished rewriting history. In 1944, while the war still rages, Hoover commissions a propaganda film titled The Battle of the United States. Director Frank Capra, famous for idealistic patriotic films, produces a documentary depicting the FBI as the sole force that defeated Nazi espionage in South America. The film shows FBI agents conducting surveillance, making arrests, interrogating suspects. It depicts intelligence work as traditional detective work: interviews, stakeouts, raids. It makes no mention of signals intelligence, cryptanalysis, or the Coast Guard. The film is distributed to theaters nationwide, seen by millions. It shapes public understanding of how the Nazi threat was defeated. Hoover also ensures that the documentary record is altered. FBI personnel review Coast Guard intelligence files, extracting reports related to Nazi espionage, and transfer them to Bureau archives. The reports are restamped with FBI classifications, refiled under Bureau case numbers. Original authorship is obscured. When historians later access these files through Freedom of Information Act requests, they see FBI cover sheets and naturally assume FBI authorship. The evidence of Elizabeth Friedman's contribution is buried in a bureaucratic filing system specifically designed to obscure it. This is not accidental. This is deliberate institutional theft, erasing one agency's work to enhance another's reputation. And because the work is classified, no one can challenge the false narrative. Elizabeth knows what has happened,
But she cannot speak. Her oath forbids it. In her private papers, never published during her lifetime, Elizabeth writes a memoir titled Footnote to History, a bitter, precise title acknowledging how history treats women who work in silence. She writes, "I signed the pledge that was exacted of all departing from the sacred precincts of secrecy, the pledge never to reveal, at least without authority from on high, or even to refer to, any of the projects with which I had dealt during WWII." She describes her wartime work in careful, circumspect language, avoiding classified details, knowing that even her private memoir might someday be read by authorities. She documents her career, her achievements, her frustrations. But she never publishes. The manuscript remains in her files, a testament written for future historians, if any ever care to look. October 31st, 1980. Elizabeth Smith Friedman dies at age 88 in Plainfield, New Jersey. Her obituary in the New York Times is brief, noting her work during Prohibition, her marriage to the famous cryptographer William Friedman, her 2 children. It mentions that she was a consultant to government agencies. It does not mention Enigma. It does not mention Nazi espionage networks. It does not mention that she was, for much of World War II, one of the most effective intelligence operatives in the Western Hemisphere. Because in 1980, none of this is public knowledge. The files remain classified. The truth remains hidden. She dies believing she is a footnote, knowing that history has erased her, unable to correct the record because the law forbids her to speak. Her papers, including the unpublished memoir, are donated to the George C. Marshall Foundation, an archive dedicated to preserving military history. Researchers occasionally encounter her name in footnotes, references to a woman who worked in cryptography during the 1920s and 1930s. Nothing more. The full story remains locked in classified files, inaccessible, invisible. 1998. William Friedman's papers are formally organized and open to researchers at the Marshall Foundation. Scholars studying the history of American cryptography begin finding references to Elizabeth's work. They see letters, memos, technical reports. They realize she was not merely a supporting figure, but a significant cryptanalyst in her own right. But the details remain classified. Coast Guard records show agents interacting with the FBI, but not with code-breaking experts. The full story, what went on behind the scenes, is not accessible.
Are still restricted. FBI files are still sealed. Navy intelligence documents are unavailable. Researchers can see hints, fragments, suggestions of important work, but they cannot access the primary sources. The story remains incomplete. 2008, the National Security Agency, in coordination with the National Archives, initiates a comprehensive declassification review of World War II signals intelligence records. Thousands of pages of documents are evaluated, redacted where necessary, and released to the public. Among these documents are the intelligence reports produced by Elizabeth Friedman's Coast Guard Cryptanalysis Unit between 1940 and 1945. Researchers access the files. They find detailed decryption reports, technical analyses of Enigma systems, translations of Nazi messages, intelligence summaries sent to Navy Command and the State Department. They find evidence of over 4,000 decrypted messages. They find documentation of 3 separate Enigma breaks. They find proof that Elizabeth Friedman and her small team did what the FBI claimed credit for, dismantling Nazi intelligence networks in South America. The documentary record is unambiguous. The cryptanalysis was done by the Coast Guard, led by a woman, using methods and expertise that J. Edgar Hoover's Bureau did not possess. The false narrative is exposed. History can be corrected. Journalists, historians, and authors begin researching Elizabeth's life in detail. In 2017, Jason Fagone publishes The Woman Who Smashed Codes, a comprehensive biography based on declassified documents and archival research. The book reveals the full scope of her career, her technical achievements, her systematic erasure from history. It wins awards, generates media attention, introduces Elizabeth Friedman's story to a public that never knew she existed. In 2020, PBS broadcasts The Codebreaker, a documentary film telling her story. The National Security Agency formally recognizes her in its Hall of Honor, acknowledging her as one of the pioneers of American cryptanalysis. The Coast Guard names future vessels in her honor. Academic conferences include papers on her methods, her influence, her contributions to both cryptography and women's history. 70 years after her wartime service, 40 years after her death, she is finally recognized. But recognition is not justice. Justice would have been acknowledgement during her lifetime. Justice would have been promotion to the senior rank she deserved, based on demonstrated expertise and successful operations. Justice would have been equal pay, equal authority, equal credit. Justice would have been the Medal of Merit or the Presidential Medal of Freedom, awarded to her husband William and to other male cryptanalysts for work no more significant than hers. Justice would have been declassification of her wartime record before her death, allowing her to see her story told, her reputation restored, her erasure corrected. She received none of this. She received a civil service salary, a windowless office, and an oath of silence. When she died, the world remembered her husband's achievements and forgot her own. Only when the secrecy lifted, decades after her death, did the truth emerge. And by then, the woman who could have told her own story was long gone. But the work remains. The documents do not lie. The decrypted messages preserved in archives prove what she accomplished. The intelligence reports, once classified secret, are now public, showing the systematic dismantling of Nazi networks through signals intelligence. The court testimony, transcribed and filed, demonstrates her expertise and the impact of her work on criminal justice. The technical papers she wrote, training manuals for military cryptanalysts, reveal her depth of knowledge. The letters from colleagues, preserved in her papers, show the respect she commanded.
Among those who knew her skills, all of this evidence exists, tangible and verifiable. Elizabeth Smith Friedman was one of the greatest intelligence officers of the 20th century. History tried to erase her. The documents prove history was wrong. If this story gave you a new way to see the history of World War II and the hidden battles fought in silence, like, share, and subscribe, and tell us which moment surprised you most. We'll return next week with another chapter in the war that changed the world. December 7th, 1941. Japanese carrier aircraft strike Pearl Harbor at dawn, destroying battleships, killing over 2,000 Americans, bringing the United States into a global war it had desperately tried to avoid. The attack transforms American society overnight. Military recruitment stations overflow, factories convert to war production, intelligence agencies mobilize every resource. The Coast Guard's cryptanalysis unit, which has operated quietly within the Treasury Department for over a decade, is immediately absorbed into the Navy's Signals Intelligence Command structure. The rationale is operational necessity. The Navy needs centralized control over all maritime intelligence. But the practical effect is organizational disruption and personal demotion. Elizabeth's office is relocated. Her unit's administrative designation changes. Her work is redirected toward Axis signals exclusively. And she loses her command authority. The Navy does not permit civilians to command intelligence units in wartime. Moreover, in 1941, women are prohibited from serving in the U.S. military in intelligence roles. The Women's Army Corps and WWIIs, Women Accepted for Volunteer Emergency Service in the Navy, will not be established until 1942, and even then, female personnel are restricted from classified operations. Elizabeth is given the civil service title of cryptanalyst, assigned a desk in a secure facility, provided access to intercepts, and instructed to continue her analytical work. But a young male lieutenant with minimal cryptanalytic experience is appointed to command what had been her unit. She trains him. She supervises the actual analytical work. She produces the intelligence reports. But officially, she is merely a technical expert reporting to military command. The demotion is humiliating. The loss of authority stings deeply. She has spent 15 years building this unit, training personnel, developing methodologies, establishing procedures. Now, a less qualified man receives credit for work she directs. But personal feelings are irrelevant in wartime. The work matters infinitely more than pride or recognition. She swallows her anger, accepts the demotion without public complaint, and does the work that needs doing, because thousands of lives depend on it. Since early 1940, even before Pearl Harbor, Elizabeth has been tracking Nazi communications throughout Latin America. German military intelligence, the Abwehr, has methodically established networks of agents from Mexico to Argentina, operating under diplomatic, commercial, and journalistic cover. These agents gather intelligence on multiple targets: Allied shipping schedules and routes, military installations and defenses, industrial production capacity, political developments, anti-German sentiment, potential supporters of Nazi ideology. They transmit their findings via clandestine radio using high-frequency transmitters hidden in embassy attics, business basements, private residences, and rural estates. The transmissions are brief to avoid radio direction finding, encrypted to prevent interception value, transmitted at irregular times to complicate monitoring. But the Coast Guard, and later the Navy, intercepts them anyway. Listening stations in Texas, Florida, the Canal Zone, and the Caribbean monitor shortwave frequencies continuously. When suspicious transmissions are detected, operators record them manually or on wax cylinders. The recordings are transcribed to paper, encrypted text
Converted to typed sheets and forwarded to Washington for analysis. The files accumulate rapidly. Hundreds of messages by late 1940, thousands by 1942. Elizabeth's job, initially as Coast Guard cryptanalyst, then as Navy technical expert, is to break these codes and extract actionable intelligence. The early Nazi codes used by Abwehr agents in South America are relatively straightforward hand ciphers, substitution systems where plain text letters are replaced according to predetermined tables, occasionally enhanced with transposition or numerical codes. These systems are vulnerable to classical cryptanalytic techniques. Elizabeth breaks them methodically using frequency analysis, pattern recognition, crib exploitation, and operator error analysis. German radio operators, despite training, make mistakes. They reuse keys, a cardinal sin in cryptography that allows the same ciphertext to be matched against different plain texts, revealing the key through comparison. They send duplicate messages, transmitting the same plaintext under different keys or the same key at different times, providing multiple samples for analysis. They include predictable text, radio call signs that follow standard formats, message preambles that use formulaic language, sign-offs that repeat identical phrases. Each predictable element provides a crib, a fragment of known or guessed plaintext that can be tested against ciphertext to recover encryption keys. The decrypted messages reveal disturbing operational intelligence. Nazi agents are systematically tracking every major convoy leaving American ports. They position observers near shipyards, naval bases, and commercial piers. They note ship names and types, observe cargo loading, record departure times and apparent destinations. They transmit this intelligence to Abwehr headquarters in Berlin, which forwards it to German Naval Command, which uses it to vector U-boat wolf packs to intercept Allied convoys. The Battle of the Atlantic, fought largely beneath the surface by submarines attacking cargo vessels, is as strategically critical as any land campaign. Britain depends entirely on imported food, fuel, raw materials, and military supplies. The Soviet Union receives American Lend-Lease aid via Arctic convoys. Allied offensives in North Africa and Italy require continuous logistical support across thousands of miles of ocean. Without control of Atlantic sea lanes, the Allies cannot sustain their war effort. And in 1941 and 1942, they are losing that battle catastrophically. German submarines sink over 1 million tons of Allied shipping in the first 6 months of 1942 alone. Freighters carrying food, munitions, fuel, tanks, aircraft, medical supplies, everything required to fight a modern war. Without those supplies, Britain faces starvation. The Soviet Union faces collapse. Allied armies cannot be equipped or sustained. The U-boat campaign threatens to win the war for Germany without ever defeating enemy armies in battle, simply by severing the logistical arteries that keep those armies alive.
Elizabeth's decrypts reveal how German intelligence knows where to strike. A Nazi agent in Buenos Aires watches the port of New York from intelligence provided by a network contact, notes when major troop ships depart, estimates their speed and course, transmits encrypted reports. Abwehr Berlin receives the intelligence within hours of interception, forwards it to U-boat command, which repositions submarines along probable convoy routes. One message, decrypted by Elizabeth's team in March 1942, reads with chilling precision. Queen Mary departed on March 8, 1800, local time. The RMS Queen Mary, converted from luxury ocean liner to troop ship, is carrying 8,398 American soldiers from New York to Scotland. If German naval intelligence receives this report and vectors submarines to intercept, the ship is doomed, despite her speed. A coordinated Wolfpack attack could overwhelm even a fast vessel. 8,000 men would drown in the North Atlantic, one of the worst maritime disasters in history. But Elizabeth's decrypt reaches Navy Operational Command within hours of interception. Orders are transmitted through secure channels. The Queen Mary's captain receives instructions to alter course, taking a longer southern route through waters with fewer U-boats.
Concentrations. The ship changes heading, increases speed, zigzags across empty ocean. She reaches Gourock, Scotland safely on March 13, 1942. 8,000 soldiers disembark, alive, entirely unaware how close they came to death, never knowing that a woman in Washington reading encrypted messages saved their lives. Elizabeth never learns their names. She never receives official thanks. She is not permitted to know whether her intelligence was utilized or filed away. This is the fundamental nature of signals intelligence work. Cryptanalysts operate in isolation, decrypting messages that disappear into classification systems, analyzed by distant commanders, acted upon by forces the analysts never see or communicate with. Feedback is minimal to non-existent. Security protocols prohibit confirming to analysts whether their work influenced operations, lest any compromise reveal that codes have been broken. Success in this field is measured not in visible victories, but in disasters that never occur. Casualties never counted, because they never happen. Ships that reach port safely, without ever knowing they were targeted. This is invisible warfare, conducted in silence, recognized by no one, rewarded with no glory. But in March 1942, disaster strikes from an unexpected direction, not from enemy action, but from bureaucratic incompetence and ego. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover learns through liaison channels that Coast Guard cryptanalysts have identified Nazi agents operating throughout South America. Hoover sees opportunity, not operational complexity. If FBI agents arrest these spies, the Bureau receives credit for smashing a major Nazi espionage network, generating positive headlines, demonstrating FBI effectiveness in wartime counterintelligence, enhancing Hoover's personal reputation and the Bureau's standing with Congress and the White House. He does not understand signals intelligence. He does not grasp that arresting agents reveals to remaining networks that their communications are compromised, causing immediate operational changes, frequency shifts, code upgrades, procedural modifications, personnel relocations. He understands only publicity and institutional prestige. He orders FBI agents in South America to conduct immediate arrests of identified suspects. On March 17, 1942, FBI agents, coordinating with Brazilian federal police, raid multiple locations in Rio de Janeiro, arresting several suspected Nazi agents and seizing radio equipment, codebooks, and documents. Press releases are drafted and distributed. American newspapers report FBI success in breaking a Nazi spy ring. Hoover holds press conferences describing Bureau effectiveness in protecting the Western Hemisphere from Axis subversion. And every German intelligence officer in South America realizes instantly that their communication security has been compromised. Radio traffic ceases abruptly. Frequencies fall silent. Operators shut down transmitters, destroy code materials, relocate to safe houses, change identities. Intelligence networks that Elizabeth's team spent 2 years patiently mapping through cryptanalysis go dark overnight. 2 years of intelligence work, identifying agents, tracking networks, building organizational charts, understanding operational patterns, are destroyed in a single week for the sake of newspaper headlines and FBI glory. Intelligence officers who worked these cases are furious. Navy Communications Intelligence protests formally to the FBI through liaison channels. The State Department's Intelligence Division complains that operational security has been catastrophically breached.
Even the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, America's wartime
espionage agency, objects that premature arrest compromise ongoing counterintelligence operations. Hoover issues bland bureaucratic statements defending the raids as operationally necessary, claiming that imminent threats required immediate action. The damage is irreversible. German intelligence, now aware that their South American codes have been broken, implements comprehensive security upgrades, new cipher systems, different radio protocols, enhanced operational security, stricter agent discipline. Elizabeth's intercepts become gibberish again. She is back to cryptanalytic ground zero, facing new unknown codes, new sophisticated systems designed specifically to resist the analytical techniques that broke the old ones. Elizabeth does what she has always done throughout her career when confronted with setbacks. She goes back to work. By April 1942, new clandestine radio stations begin transmitting throughout South America, broadcasting in codes that initial analysis cannot break. The signals are encrypted using systems far more complex than previous hand ciphers. German intelligence has deployed Enigma machines, sophisticated electromechanical encryption devices that represent the most advanced cryptographic technology of the era. The Germans have used Enigma in various forms since the 1920s, continuously developing more complex versions for military and intelligence applications. By 1942, Enigma represents the pinnacle of encryption technology, a machine that Nazi cryptographers believe produces unbreakable ciphertext through mathematical and mechanical complexity that no human analyst can defeat. The Enigma machine resembles a portable typewriter encased in a wooden box. When opened, it reveals a keyboard, 3 or more rotating wheels called rotors, a plug board with electrical cables, and a lamp board displaying output letters. An operator types a plain text letter on the keyboard. Electrical current flows through the plug board, which implements a simple substitution by cross-wiring letter pairs. Current then passes through the 3 rotors in sequence, each rotor wired internally in complex substitution patterns. After passing through all 3 rotors, current hits a reflector that sends it back through the rotors in reverse order, following different electrical paths. The resulting output letter illuminates on the lamp board. The operator records this ciphertext letter and proceeds to the next character. Critically, each key press advances the rightmost rotor 1 position, changing the electrical pathway, altering the substitution for the next letter. After a complete rotation, the right rotor advances the middle rotor 1 step. After the middle rotor completes its rotation, it advances the left rotor. This creates a polyalphabetic substitution system with vast complexity. The effective key length is millions of characters before patterns repeat, and the total number of possible machine settings, considering rotor selection, rotor order, ring settings, initial positions, and plugboard configurations, exceeds 150 trillion possible combinations. Without knowing the specific settings used, brute force decryption by testing every possibility is effectively impossible, even with mechanical computers. In Britain, mathematician Alan Turing and the cryptanalysis team at Bletchley Park have developed methods for breaking German military Enigma using electromechanical machines called bomb bays. These devices, each the size of a large wardrobe weighing over a ton, automate the testing of potential rotor configurations by exploiting structural weaknesses in Enigma's design. The reflector creates reciprocal encryption. If A encrypts to X, then X encrypts to A under identical settings, and no letter ever encrypts to itself.
Thousands of pounds. Bletchley Park operates over 200 of them by 1943, working continuously, maintained by teams of engineers, operated by hundreds of trained personnel, consuming enormous electrical power. Even with this industrial-scale computational infrastructure, breaking Enigma remains difficult, time-consuming, sometimes impossible if insufficient ciphertext is available or if encryption keys change before enough messages accumulate for statistical analysis. Elizabeth Friedman breaks Enigma messages in a Navy office in Washington with 4 civilian assistants, pencils, graph paper, and absolutely no mechanical computing aids. The task seems impossible. It is not. The Enigma models deployed by Nazi agents in South America are not identical to German military versions. They are commercial Enigma machines produced by Chiffrier Maschine AG in Berlin for business use, with simpler configurations. 3 rotors instead of military models' 5 available rotors, less complex plug boards, more predictable operating procedures. But they remain sophisticated polyalphabetic encryption devices, producing ciphertext that resists classical cryptanalysis. Breaking them without mechanical aids requires understanding the machine's mathematical structure, exploiting operator errors and procedural weaknesses, and applying cryptanalytic intuition developed through decades of experience. Elizabeth begins with first principles. Enigma, despite its mechanical sophistication, has exploitable structural characteristics. The reciprocal wiring means encryption and decryption use identical settings. If plaintext A produces ciphertext X, then plaintext X produces ciphertext A under the same configuration. This symmetry creates statistical patterns invisible to machine designers but visible to experienced analysts. The reflector ensures that no letter ever encrypts to itself. If plain text is E, ciphertext cannot be E, regardless of settings. This constraint seems trivial, but is profoundly exploitable. If an analyst can guess part of the plain text, a crib, and align it against ciphertext, any position where guessed plain text matches ciphertext is automatically impossible, eliminating entire branches of the key search space. German operators, despite training and discipline, make predictable mistakes. They reuse daily keys. They send routine messages with stereotyped content, weather reports following standard formats, status updates using formulaic language, greetings and sign-offs with identical phrasing. These predictable phrases provide cribs for cracking the daily key. Elizabeth also exploits transmission metadata that reveals patterns invisible in ciphertext alone. Messages sent at the same time each morning likely contain similar routine content. Messages of identical length might be duplicate transmissions. Radio call signs, though encrypted, follow organizational patterns that persist across different encryption keys. Over months of patient collection and analysis, her team builds statistical profiles of each Nazi transmitter, transmission schedules, message length distributions, typical preambles and formats, operator characteristics including mistake patterns. These profiles provide contextual information that narrows cryptanalytic search spaces dramatically, making humanly impossible tasks merely extremely difficult. By late 1942, after months of relentless work, Elizabeth and her team have broken the Nazi Enigma systems used in South America. They can read the messages again. The German agents do not know. They believe Enigma remains impenetrably secure, protected by mathematical complexity and mechanical precision. And this false confidence becomes their greatest vulnerability. They continue transmitting intelligence, unaware that every message is being read, analyzed, and acted upon by forces they cannot see. The decrypted Enigma messages expose far more than shipping intelligence and tactical information. They revealed the structure, personnel, ambitions, and methods of Nazi intelligence operations throughout the Western Hemisphere. The spy master coordinating much of this activity is Johannes Siegfried Becker, operating under the codename Sargo, the German word for sarcophagus, a grimly appropriate choice for a man whose mission involves burying Allied strategic hopes in the Americas. Becker is an SS
Sturmbannführer, equivalent in rank to a major, assigned to Abwehr operations in Buenos Aires under commercial cover as an import-export businessman. He is 41 years old in 1942. German-born, university-educated, fluent in Spanish and Portuguese, experienced in clandestine operations. His network encompasses over 50 agents distributed across Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Bolivia. Some are German nationals, working under official or business cover. Others are local recruits, fascist sympathizers, individuals motivated by money, opportunists who see Axis victory as inevitable and want to be on the winning side. Becker's agents are strategically positioned. Port authorities tracking ship movements, communications company employees accessing cable traffic, police officers monitoring political dissidents, military staff officers observing Allied military activities. But Becker's mission extends far beyond tactical intelligence collection. He is engaged in strategic political warfare, working to shift South America's political alignment toward the Axis. He funds pro-Nazi newspapers publishing propaganda. He finances fascist political parties and movements. He cultivates relationships with sympathetic military officers, laying groundwork for potential coups if democratic governments prove insufficiently cooperative. His ultimate goal is transforming South America into a region friendly to German interests, potentially providing bases for U-boat operations, supply depots for surface raiders, even staging areas for military occupation if circumstances permit. If South America falls within the Axis sphere of influence, the strategic balance of the war shifts profoundly. The United States faces hostile forces on its southern flank. Allied access to South American resources, petroleum from Venezuela, rubber from Brazil, copper from Chile, beef from Argentina, becomes compromised. The entire Western Hemisphere becomes contested space rather than secure rear area.
Elizabeth reads every message Becker sends, seeing the architecture of his network, understanding his methods and objectives. But she cannot act directly. Her role is analytical: decrypt messages, extract intelligence, compile reports. Operational action falls to other agencies. Navy intelligence coordinates tactical responses. The State Department handles diplomatic pressure. The FBI and OSS conduct counterintelligence operations within legal and political constraints. Elizabeth's decrypts are compiled into intelligence summaries, classified at the highest levels, distributed to policymakers who decide how to respond. The response is deliberately gradual, carefully calibrated to avoid revealing that codes have been broken. The State Department protests to South American governments about German espionage activities, providing sanitized evidence that suggests intelligence derived from human sources rather than signals intercepts. Governments respond with varying enthusiasm. Some arrest identified agents immediately. Others drag their feet due to pro-German sympathies or fear of antagonizing a power they believe might win the war. Gradually, through persistent diplomatic pressure backed by intelligence evidence, the networks begin collapsing. Agents are arrested, turned to work as double agents, or forced to flee. Clandestine radio stations are located through direction finding and shut down. German embassy personnel involved in intelligence work are declared persona non grata and expelled. The dismantling is slow, patient, designed to appear as normal counterintelligence work rather than comprehensive signals intelligence penetration. By late 1943, Becker's once formidable network is fragmenting. Key agents have been arrested or compromised. Radio communications have been disrupted. Operational security has been so thoroughly breached that Abwehr Berlin begins questioning whether South American operations remain viable. By mid-1944, the Nazi intelligence presence in South America has been effectively destroyed. Remaining agents operate in isolation, unable to communicate securely, unsure whom to trust, their intelligence product minimal and unreliable. Elizabeth Friedman's cryptanalysis made this systematic dismantling possible. Without her enigma breaks, the networks would have remained invisible to Allied counterintelligence. Without her team's decrypts providing documentary evidence and organizational understanding, Allied commanders would have remained strategically blind to access activities throughout the Western Hemisphere. By the end of World War II, in August 1945, Elizabeth Friedman's cryptanalysis unit has compiled an extraordinary record of achievement. They have decrypted over 4,000 Nazi messages sent from South America. They have broken 3 different Enigma systems deployed by German intelligence networks. They have provided actionable intelligence that led directly to the identification and
the neutralization of dozens of Abwehr agents. They have revealed Nazi plans for political subversion throughout Latin America, exposing fascist movements and coup plots before they could mature into serious threats. They have contributed significantly to the security of Allied shipping by exposing how German intelligence tracked convoy movements. And Elizabeth Friedman has done all of this while being systematically erased from official records, her contributions attributed to other agencies and individuals, her name deliberately omitted from the histories being written even as the war continues. August 1945. Japan surrenders. World War II ends. Elizabeth Smith Friedman resigns from government service. She is 49 years old, having spent nearly 30 years working in intelligence, most of it classified at the highest levels. Before departing, she signs the mandatory secrecy oath required of all personnel with access to signals intelligence operations. The oath is comprehensive and legally binding. I solemnly swear never to reveal, without proper authority from competent officials, any information concerning cryptanalytic work, methods, techniques, or results obtained during World War II. Violation carries criminal penalties, including imprisonment. Elizabeth understands exactly what this oath means for the remainder of her life. She can never publish memoirs describing her wartime service. She cannot discuss her work in interviews or public speeches. She cannot write articles for popular magazines or scholarly journals detailing her methods and achievements. She cannot correct the historical record when other individuals and agencies take credit for work she performed.
She cannot even tell her own children the truth about what she